COVID-19, the global pandemic that we've all been experiencing, has really impacted everybody's lives.
It just has really messed with our food supply chain that usually farmers plan months or even years in advance.
We're just planting a crop and hoping and praying at night that the pandemic ends and that the commodity prices will recover.
After COVID hit, we went from seeing 125 people, now we're seeing 1,200 people per day.
There was definitely food in the supply chain, but it wasn't able to get to the people that needed it. My name's Colleen Naughton. I'm an assistant professor in civil and environmental engineering at UC Merced. I'm working on a COVID-19 seed grant, adapting the food supply chain to the COVID-19 pandemic and beyond for a resilient future. And the problem that the project is trying to address is the disruption in food supply and demand that the pandemic caused with the closure of businesses and restaurants. We want to look at supply chains and how to create more resilient and equitable systems and make those, of course, available to the public, policymakers, and businesses to make decisions and improve the systems.
All of these measures that have been meant to slow the spread of COVID have actually disrupted completely the food supply chain. And due to this, a lot of restaurants and food service industry businesses have had to reduce their food orders or completely cancel their orders altogether. 3.7 million gallons of milk have been dumped, 750,000 chicken eggs being smashed at one farm, 1 million onions being dumped into a pit to be formed into compost instead of going to the restaurant they were planned for months in advance.
With the dumping of the surplus of food, or like the wasting of this surplus of food, a lot of people ask, if we have so many people that are now becoming food insecure, then why are we having an issue making these connections from farmer to like family or fork? There's not enough capital or profitability for these farmers that are used to selling 50-pound boxes of potatoes and finding a way to reorganize their packaging or processing to then sell to retail or sell to individuals. Dairy farmers are in a tough position because if you stop milking your cows, then your cows will run dry. And so that's why we saw all of the dumping of milk, because they're not able to store that excess milk.
In the springtime before the pandemic, dairy as an example, prices were coming up, the highest they've been in a few years, and 2020 was looking to be probably the best year in the last 4, and everybody was getting really ecstatic being in the dairy business, and then the pandemic just wiped it out. Cotton farming too. I mean, if your crop's not selling, there's nothing you can really do about it. But as farmers, I mean, we try to be resilient, and if we don't plant a crop, we don't make any money. So we're just planting a crop and hoping and praying at night that the pandemic ends and that the commodity prices will recover. My family's been doing this since 1939, and for people that, because of the pandemic, might lose their farm or have to scale back on stuff, there's an emotional toll that goes with that. Most of the people that have been working for my family have, we got people here 20 years plus, and it's a worry because you're stressed out about all these families that, rely on you, that have helped create what you have going. And moving forward, we don't know what we're going to do for sure. There's a lot of other effects on ag between water and land use and different government regulations that are already making the business harder than it used to. And then throw a pandemic on top of it that no one was expecting. It's really rough emotionally right now on everybody.
We continuously focus on a number of legislative and regulations, along with education of general topics that face our farmers and ranchers, but also the general public on a daily basis. We have multiple people that continuously call in and say that they're leaving the state, whether they're, members in other counties or just personal friends of ours, because things have been so shut down due to the pandemic. You have those difficulties in continuing your operations at times.
We saw the first effects in March of 2020. We've always seen a large demand for services. We'd probably see 125, maybe 150 people per day. After COVID hit, we went from seeing 125 people, now we're seeing 1,200 people per day. So we saw a huge influx in people that had not previously needed our service who are suddenly forced into looking for alternative sources of food because they were told they couldn't go to work. And then the wholesale market disappeared because all the big chains now also experienced supply chain issues. They were now going to the wholesale market and buying up everything on the wholesale market. And that forced food banks to actually compete in the retail market against the very people who are donating food to us. So it made it very complicated to source food because everybody, all those big donors like Costco, Walmart, Target, Safeway, were competing for that same limited supply because the supply chain was all messed up.
The Center for Information Technology Research in the Interest of Society is a 4-campus entity. It includes Berkeley, Davis, Santa Cruz, as well as UC Merced. Our interest at CITRIS is, can we actually leverage information technology in a way that helps overcome these challenges? Professor Naughton and her work has really been doing this in a way that's complementary to some things that we're doing across the campus and across the University of California. In her case, looking specifically at supply chain pinch points and using life cycle assessment to identify where along that supply chain things could be improved. So leveraging informatics and databases in new and novel ways gives us an idea where we can actually do the intervention. For us, Ag Food Tech represents an opportunity to have the injection of technology in meaningful areas, but also in such a way that we can bring in the local community, disadvantaged communities, small farmers, in such a way to solve their problems. That's critically important. Not just because of COVID-19, but things around food security, water security, and our overall sustainability. So as this moves forward, I think it's really important to recognize that it's also a solution for some of our employment challenges, as well as uplifting our local disadvantaged communities.
UC Merced is in a very unique position to conduct this research because we're located here in the Central Valley, and the Central Valley is a hub in the food supply chain, but it's also a community full of underrepresented people who are at a greater risk of food insecurity.
As we think about the importance of this research, it is critical that we recognize that UC Merced is at the center of California, and in some ways that means that we're at the center of its problems. I believe that means that we're at the epicenter of the opportunity to overcome those challenges and provide new solutions that we desperately need.
It's been a privilege to work on this project. We hope to make an impact, and that's why I became an engineer, and why I became a researcher is to solve problems and to serve society. So it's been really a privilege to have this project and to work with my students that are talented and passionate. But really, the people making the huge positive impact are our farmers, farm workers, grocery store workers, chefs, everyone providing food for America, especially right now, and a lot of times like risking their lives to do this.